If I could just welcome now Gul and Shelby, who are going to make a joint presentation. Gul is an expert in architecture and cinema. I think I'm right in saying Shelby is the digital learning expert here at Queen's University, and they've put together something for us. Okay, thank you.
I'll take this first. Let's see. Yeah, it works. Welcome, everyone. So exciting to see various age groups here. That makes me really excited about the future of such a project. I'm Gul from Queen's Architecture, and I finished writing this book about 2 years ago, which is called Reframing Berlin: Architecture, Memory Making, and Film Locations. So this is about the city in relation to collective memory or urban memory, and how we look at our past and how we deal with our past in the context of Berlin, which you probably would agree that as complex as our past here in Belfast. I have been here since 2011, and understanding why things are happening in a certain way, coming from Turkey, from a non-Christian background, was difficult for me at the beginning, but I think I'm starting to learn a lot about that. So when we finished this, just by coincidence, 2 years ago, I joined the board. And my contribution, I thought, would be more on the architectural side and the things I learned through my research in Berlin. So at some point, because I also realized how difficult building such a museum in Belfast is. But George Mitchell said something in the conference in Agreement 25 a few months ago. He said, possible is in the world impossible. Or he said it in a better way. He said, impossible includes the word possible, something like that. And I believe in this project. I believe that we will have a physical museum in Belfast dedicated to the Troubles. I believe that it's going to be a shared space for all of us, all the major groups, including the minorities, like our children here. It's going to be a place where we will be happy to go and learn locally, but also globally. While we are in this project, and I'm very hopeful that your support after today will speed things up for this project, we decided to go with a digital version of the project for a few reasons, which I wrote down. So until we have a physical museum, I think the digital version, which is at an infant stage right now, we are doing with Shelby a pilot study of the digital museum, which will become into a bigger project in the future. This will visualize the way this museum, both digital and physical, can be in the future. That's why we are doing this version. We are going to have exhibitions, simulated exhibitions in the digital museum, which will help everyone to decide how they would contribute to this project. Because this project about people of Northern Ireland, but also people who believe are affected by both the Troubles and the peace process here. We are also, as a researcher, I'm also excited about the fact that we are actually designing a new building typology because there is no fully digital museum which is not linked to a physical museum in the world. And if you have come across a museum like that, do let us know, because we couldn't find one. So we are literally inventing this typology as we go along. And finally, a museum here will be fascinating for people to visit. I always hear people saying, I took my guests to the walls, to the peace walls, and there was nowhere else to take them to show what happened here. Several people said that to me in the past, and the physical museum will be fascinating for that. But also for people who are interested in what happened and is happening in Northern Ireland, they will be able to anywhere in the world, they will be able to join us online and through the Digital Museum learn about Northern Ireland. So for those reasons, we are doing this pilot study.
Great, thanks, Gul, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the pilot study we're doing. So I'm a full-time digital learning officer here at Queen's University Belfast in the Engineering Physical Sciences faculty, and my part of my job is to look into new technology and see, is this going to be useful for education or is it not? And one of the things I've been looking at is whether the metaverse, immersive spaces, that kind of technology will be useful for education in the future. So I'm also a part-time student at Queen's, so I'm a student in the Introduction to Games Technology course, because to research this question fully, I need to become a sort of game developer, which is not something I knew I was signing up for when I became a digital learning officer, but there you go. So Gul was kind enough to let me take this on as a student project in addition to a professional project. So it's probably worth saying that I have a group of people supporting me in creating this pilot study. So I have Lauren, who's a fantastic artist, Michael, who's a great generalist and researcher. Myself, I get the title of producer, which just means I do all the things that nobody else wants to do. And then Adam Todd is a great programmer. So those are the group members who have been helping create this pilot study. So the background research that we did, as Gul mentioned, we're looking for the ideal paradigm or typology for a fully digital museum. Not a representation of a physical museum that already exists, but one that's completely born and bred in the digital. And this, as far as we know, is a completely new thing. We haven't found anything that approaches that question. And again, what does the collection consist of? Like we mentioned, we're creating a kind of network of archives. There's a lot of great research already done in Northern Ireland. So what we're trying to do is kind of build those connections between those existing archives. And we're also trying to capture voices that may be about to be lost. So there's an oral history there that we will not last forever. People who were young during the Troubles may not be so much now. So we want to preserve that kind of oral history for generations to come. We also want to, and we will show you a little bit of artwork that speaks about the Troubles kind of eloquently and authentically. And then we also want to start amassing contributions from the public. So through this digital museum, we want to hear your story, your neighbor's story, your granny's story, any stories that we come across that relate to the Troubles. And we want to turn that into a kind of archive. Here you can see a little bit of the why and MoTap things that I'm just writing, kind of my own notes that I've scribbled down. So in terms of other virtual museums, again, as we said, there are a lot of great collections that are presented well online, but nothing that holds a candle to actually physically going to the museum. If you can't make it to LA, the J. Paul Getty Museum online presence is great. And a lot of these sprung up during COVID when you couldn't get to these museums. It's fine, but it's nowhere near as good as going to the museum itself. Same with the Guggenheim in Bilbao. A lovely online website, not necessarily an experience that's meant to be had online. It's just kind of the next best thing. So this is Frank gave us this lovely idea when we were in conversation with him, in that the museum will be like a book about the Troubles written by many authors. So we don't want it to be one narrative about this is the history and this is what happened. We want to be pluralist. We want to kind of amass a repository of memory, is another quote from Catherine Clinton, who we've also spoken to about this. So we come up with, just for our pilot study, because we have to complete our work by the end of April, we had to kind of very narrowly focus on what kind of spaces we want to build in the here and now that we can then show and say, this is what we think a good museum typology will look like. So we're starting with the Peace Park and the Dome, which you can see a little sliver of there. I'm going to show you a video of a walkthrough of it so you can see it in more detail. So this is the entrance to the museum, inspired by the Garden of the Jewish Museum in Berlin by Daniel Libeskind, but also loosely modeled on Botanic. The entrance is inspired by this idea, but we wanted to have a very local flavor. There's another one that is inspired by the Prison Memory Archive, which is a fantastic archive. It has lots and lots of footage of people who were associated with the Maze and the Armagh prisons. So we have a simulation of the H-box for video screening. Another space we haven't built yet, but we're appealing to you. We can actually appeal to you this evening for some resources about the Belfast Ring of Steel. So in the city centre, this area that was cordoned off and you had to be checked in order to go into this part of Belfast city centre. Something that is almost unimaginable if you're walking from City Hall down Donegal Place today, you kind of can't imagine that this was ever there, but it was. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail. And then we also have a temporary gallery in which we can explore different kinds of exhibitions. So for example, we may have scans of the peace walls and you can go and visit those. The great thing about a temporary gallery in a museum is you don't have to put up your exhibition and then take it down because you need the space. You don't need the space. You can actually just layer temporary exhibitions one on top of the other, so that can actually grow as the collection grows. So this is a walkthrough of the Peace Park as it stands now. Excuse the ugly border. We were building this in Unity and we haven't actually exported it yet. So this is just a kind of a snapshot of how it looks. So you walk through the park and then you approach a geodesic dome, a Buckminster Fuller style dome, which is kind of very neutral architecture. And then we see our first artwork in the middle here. This is a very poor scan that I did last weekend that is just a placeholder, but it is Woman in a Bomb Blast by Effie McWilliam, who's an artist from Banbridge. And that was kindly allowed for us to use by the estate of Effie McWilliam. And then we have a couple doors here that will lead to the other parts of the museum. So instead of having to walk to a different gallery, you sort of teleport to another part of the museum. This is a run through of the temporary gallery. I've just put some things in here as an example, but you'll see it's a very neutral space that actually has nothing in it. It's kind of like the construct in the Matrix. You can actually load here whatever you like and make it into its own space. This is a painting by Tommy Barr, who had great fortune to meet in the Effie McWilliams gallery, and that's a piece about St. Patrick and the border. We have Galileo, who you might recognize if you've ever been out those doors. And then we have a very rough scan of the peace walls here, so that might give you a sense of, you can have paintings, you can have sculptures, you can have recreations of entire streets. So in this kind of space, anything is possible. You don't have a kind of space constraint or a physical constraint. So this is the prison cell that I mentioned. Sorry, it's taking a little bit of time to load up there for you. So this was inspired by, again, the Prison Memory Archive. So here we have a model of the H blocks in the Maze prison. So you can walk through the corridor and have a look at what the prison would have been like. And then it will show you in a minute, but there are some cells that are open, and that will allow you to enter the cell, and then you'll be able to interact with the archive itself from the cell. So we'll just allow it to walk in here. So this is the archive itself in the context of the cell. There are some videos.
There's a longer corridor leading to two additional rooms to the right-hand side. A back section of the hut. The space is empty, but for a large white bag at the far end of the room. The outside door is ajar. Outside, a pile of rubble lies by the wire fence, which separates the compound from another.
It's amazing, like.
So that's the long cache model, and the next one is that we haven't started yet, but we're really keen to get going on, is the Belfast Ring of Steel. So this one we'll start with a modern day model of Donegal Place right there in front of City Hall, and start with how it looks now, and then travel back in time through the 90s, the 80s, and 70s to show you what that checkpoint might have looked like at that time, starting with the kind of very militarized kind of checkpoint, and kind of showing how it developed through the decades. To give people a sense of what it would have been like to be every day in Northern Ireland. It's not, fantastical. It's nothing very glamorous, and people in Northern Ireland would have just taken this to be kind of normal, but it's not really. For most other people would see this as a very kind of invasive kind of thing. So I think that could be interesting to show how life was kind of day in, day out and during that time period. So to complete this project, I would really like some more reference photos. I'm not sure if it's the case that reference photos weren't allowed to be taken because of security reasons, or it's just that there just aren't many that exist because it's not that interesting. But if anyone has any reference photos of that area, the checkpoint at Donegal Place, please do get in touch, because it's very hard to build a 3D model when you don't have very much to go on, essentially. So our next steps are we're going to be creating some non-player characters where it can also appeal for your help is if anyone is interested in playing a character or in delivering a bit of research or a bit of information as an avatar. We would really like to populate the museum with some characters. Of course, we're modeling Donegal Place as the next step, and then we're doing some technical things around transitioning assets, securing copyright, of course, and scene transition. So, and also for a temporary exhibition, if anyone is an artist or knows any artists who would like to speak about the subject, or who would like to include their artwork in this museum, that would be great. And of course, our most important steps, take all your feedback on board. Thank you.